Cat and his stressed life. The wind howled down the narrow streets of Willow Creek like a ghost searching for something it had lost. Snowflakes danced in the air under the pale orange glow of the streetlights, turning the small town into a silent painting. It was Christmas Eve, but there were no carolers. No laughter, just the crunch of boots on snow. Elena Carter pulled her wool coat tighter around her slender frame. The wind stung her cheeks, but she didn't mind. She had always found peace in the silence of snowfall. Her gloved hands clutched a small wrapped canvas. Her latest painting, meant for the town's little art gallery. As she passed the old iron bench near the corner of Rosewood Street, she stopped. A faint sound pierced the silence. A weak, broken meow. She froze. Again, meow. Softer this time, fragile, like it was slipping away. She crouched down, heart suddenly pounding. Underneath the bench, half covered in slush and trembling uncontrollably, was a tiny black kitten. Its fur was matted, its ribs slightly visible through the skin. Snow had crusted around its ears. "Oh my God," Elena whispered, lowering the canvas beside her. She slowly extended her hand. The kitten didn't run. It couldn't. Its golden eyes just stared at her, terrified, but still holding something else. Something she recognized all too well. Loneliness. "You poor thing," she said softly, tears forming in her eyes. "What are you doing out here all alone?" The kitten made a small sound, more of a breath than a cry. Without hesitation, Elena took off her scarf and gently wrapped the kitten in it. The little body was almost weightless. She held it close to her chest, feeling the faintest heartbeat. "You're okay now," she murmured. "You're safe. I've got you." As she hurried home through the snow, she didn't care that her own face was soaked and red, or that the wind had knocked her canvas into a snowdrift. All she could think of was the fragile life in her arms, clinging to warmth like a final prayer. When they got home, Elena lit a fire and wrapped the kitten in a soft towel. She placed a saucer of warm milk nearby and whispered, "I don't know if you'll make it through the night, but I promise you won't be alone." The kitten, still trembling, rested its head on her palm. Elena smiled faintly through her tears. "You followed me like a shadow tonight." "That's what I'll call you, Shadow." Grief had been her companion long before Shadow arrived. But now, for the first time in years, something warm breathed beside her in the silence. The morning after their snow-drenched meeting, Elena awoke not to the sound of an alarm or passing cars, but to the delicate pressure of tiny paws kneading the wool blanket beside her. Sunlight filtered in through the frosted window, painting golden stripes on the wooden floor, and in the middle of that warm pool of light sat Shadow, dry, clean, and curious. Her golden eyes flickered from the window to Elena, as if asking, "Is this real? Am I really safe?" Elena blinked the sleep from her eyes and whispered, "You stayed—" Shadow tilted her head. It was a simple moment. But to Elena, it felt like someone had taken a needle and sewn a torn piece of her soul back into place. Elena's home was small but full of life, old paintbrushes and coffee mugs, half-finished canvases on easels, and warm wooden floors that creaked like they had stories of their own. Books lined the walls. Jazz records sat in messy stacks near the turntable, but none of it had ever made the house feel full. Until now, Shadow followed Elena from room to room like a silent guardian. She'd sit beside her while Elena painted, sometimes batting at the brush with her paw or walking across the canvas, mid-stroke, leaving smudges Elena never had the heart to erase. "You're my little critic, huh?" Elena laughed one afternoon as she wiped blue paint off Shadow's nose. "Maybe you'll teach me how to feel something again." Shadow's purring was the only answer, but it was enough. In the evenings, they'd sit by the fireplace, Elena with a mug of peppermint tea, Shadow curled in her lap. The fire would crackle, soft jazz would play in the background, and the silence between them was never empty. It was comforting. One night, Elena whispered into the quiet, "I lost my mom 3 winters ago. She used to hum that song." Shadow blinked, still and listening. "And then I lost the man I thought I'd marry. He said I was too quiet for this world. Funny, right?" She let out a dry laugh. "But I think you get that, don't you? You're quiet too." Shadow rubbed her head against Elena's hand. They both had been abandoned in their own ways, but together they were mending. As the days passed, Shadow regained her strength. She began chasing strings, climbing shelves and sleeping like she belonged. Elena caught herself smiling more, even humming while she cooked. Neighbors noticed. "You look lighter," one said at the market. "Maybe I am," she replied. "I think I adopted a therapist." But deep down, Elena knew it wasn't just about joy. It was healing. A healing that came wrapped in fur with silent eyes and a patient heart. One snowy evening, Elena stood in her studio, finishing a painting she had started months ago, a self-portrait. But this time she added a shadow beside her figure, not dark, not haunting, just there, present, loyal, whole. She held Shadow in her arms and whispered, "You saved me, little one. But what if someday I can't save you back?" Shadow rested her head on Elena's shoulder and closed her eyes. And in that moment, the world outside could have burned or frozen. Elena wouldn't have noticed. Because for the first time in years, she wasn't alone. The days grew longer, but Elena didn't. Spring arrived in Willow Creek with wildflowers blooming along the sidewalks and soft winds fluttering through curtains. The world was waking up, but something inside Elena was slowly falling asleep. At first, it was just tiredness. She blamed it on long painting sessions and sleepless nights. Then came the coughing fits, sharp, dry, relentless. She brushed them off with a smile. "It's just allergies," she told the pharmacist, waving away concern with the same hands that trembled too often now. But Shadow noticed. She would sit on the windowsill, no longer interested in the birds but in Elena, watching, waiting, worrying. One afternoon, Elena collapsed while reaching for a teacup. The sound of the crash brought Shadow racing in, tail high and alert. Elena lay on the kitchen floor, gasping, clutching her chest. Shadow meowed, loud, frantic. Unlike her usual silence, and rubbed against Elena's face, pawing her shoulder, refusing to leave her side. When Elena finally opened her eyes, she smiled weakly. You knew, didn't you?" The hospital smelled like bleach and fear. After a blur of tests, scans, and words she couldn't quite comprehend, the doctor sat across from her with eyes full of pity. "Elena, it's stage 4. The cancer has spread. It's advanced." She blinked, lips parting to speak, but no sound came. Her fingers tightened on her coat sleeve, and the doctor placed a hand over hers. "I'm so sorry." Elena stared at the wall behind him, a painting of wild horses running in the sun, and thought, "I'll never paint something that free again." At home she broke down, not from the fear of dying, but from the thought of leaving Shadow alone in a world that had already abandoned her once. That night, curled on the sofa with Shadow lying silently on her chest, she whispered through tears, "What happens to you when I'm gone? Who will understand you like I do? Who will love you without needing you to be anything but quiet?" Shadow blinked slowly, leaning into her chest, and let out a low, purring hum. It was a sound of comfort, a promise. "I'm here." Elena cried until sleep took her. Weeks passed in a blur of medications, hospice visits, and unfinished paintings. Shadow never left her side, not even when the fire in the hearth went cold. She slept beside Elena's feet, guarded the bedroom door, and hissed at strangers she didn't trust. One hospice nurse, Diane, paused while checking vitals and said, "It's like she knows." Elena smiled faintly. "She does. She's smarter than most people I know." In those final quiet nights, Elena would sit by the window, Shadow on her lap, and trace the stars with her finger against the cold glass. "I always thought I had time," she whispered. "Time to fall in love again. Time to finish my art. Time to live out loud, but I think maybe my story was always meant to end in whispers." She looked down at Shadow, gently brushing a finger down her soft black fur. "You were my last beautiful chapter." Shadow pressed her head into Elena's chest, and for that moment, the house was full, not of sound, but of something greater. Love. The wind had stopped. For the first time in months, the house was utterly still. No jazz records played. No brushstrokes danced across canvas. No quiet laughter filled the evening air. Just silence. Heavy, unkind silence. Shadow sat beside the easel, staring at a half-finished painting. A figure of a woman, Elena, stood in a field of yellow sunflowers, her face half-detailed, eyes missing. The brush that was once in her hand lay untouched on the floor, dry, stiff with weeks-old paint. It had been 2 days since Elena went into the hospital. 2 days since Shadow last heard her heartbeat. The neighbor, Mr. Fenley, had broken the news. She asked me to check on Shadow if something ever happened, he had said, tears brimming in his eyes as he opened the door with the spare key Elena had given him. She passed last night, peacefully, in her sleep. The moment he spoke the words, Shadow let out a single piercing meow. Not like before, this one was long and hollow, echoing through the empty room like a final farewell. She didn't eat that night, didn't sleep, didn't move from Elena's worn, scent-filled sweater on the bed. The house grieved. The fireplace remained cold. Elena's last cup of tea still sat on the nightstand, untouched, its surface growing mold. Her paintings leaned silently against the walls, like ghosts waiting to be completed. And Shadow waited. Each day she padded to the front door, sat, and stared. Then the bedroom, then the easel. Each night she curled into the blanket that still carried Elena's scent. Each morning she meowed once, to nothing, to no one, and fell silent again. Mr. Fenley tried to care for her. He placed fresh bowls of food and water, changed the litter, sat near her, whispered gentle words. But Shadow never responded. She ate only enough to survive. Her eyes never blinked with curiosity. Her paws never played with ribbons or string. She wasn't really alive. She was waiting. Then came the day Mr. Fenley brought a woman with him. Claire, a distant niece of Elena's. She was kind, young, and quiet, with paint-stained fingers and a soft voice. I'd like to keep her, Claire said, stroking Shadow's back. If she'll let me. Shadow didn't flinch, but she didn't lean in either. She's still grieving, Mr. Fenley said. They were all each other had. Claire opened the small leather-bound book and read aloud. She doesn't speak much, but I feel like she listens. When I cry, she sits beside me like she knows. She is the only creature who doesn't ask me to be anything I'm not. In her silence, I hear more love than any words ever gave me. Tears fell from Claire's eyes. She loved you so much, Shadow. Shadow climbed up onto her chest and laid her head beneath Claire's chin. And for the first time since Elena's passing, she truly rested. But that night, as Claire slept with Shadow curled at her feet, something shifted in the room. The door creaked slightly open without a breeze, and on the canvas, Elena's last unfinished work, there was now a faint outline of a second figure beside the woman in the field. Shadow rose suddenly, walked to the easel and sat. She stared, not afraid, but certain. She knew who had been there, and as Claire stirred and the soft whisper of a familiar voice filled the room once more, the house felt less empty. Just for a moment, the morning light spilled gently through the windows, painting long golden beams across the floorboards. Claire stood in the kitchen, pouring warm milk into a bowl, when she noticed something odd. Shadow wasn't waiting. She was always there, like clockwork, silent, still, watching. But that morning, the cushion near the windowsill was empty. The hallway was quiet, the bedroom untouched. Panic fluttered in Claire's chest. "Shadow?" she called softly, stepping barefoot across the creaking floor. No sound. Then, from behind the studio door, a faint rustle. She opened it slowly. Shadow sat there in front of the easel, eyes wide, fixed, still as a statue. But something was different. Claire's breath caught in her throat. On the canvas, Elena's final painting, new brushstrokes had appeared overnight. Real, thick strokes of fresh paint, blending into the old. The woman in the field was now complete, her eyes painted wide and kind. Her hand was outstretched, and holding something. "A black cat." "Shadow," Claire whispered. "That wasn't there yesterday." She stepped closer, touched the canvas. The paint was still damp. She looked at Shadow. "Did you?" But Shadow didn't move, only blinked. Then meowed once, long and low. That night the whispers returned. This time they weren't just echoes. Claire lay in bed with the journal pressed to her chest. Shadow stood at the edge of the bed, staring at the corner of the room. Then came a voice. Soft, familiar, Elena's. "She needs you now." Claire sat up, heart pounding. "Elena?" No reply. But Shadow leapt down, padded into the hallway, and sat in front of the studio door, tail twitching, alert. Claire followed, a quiet fear blooming in her throat. She opened the door slowly. The easel had moved, turned slightly, now facing the window where the moonlight streamed in. The painting had changed again. A sunflower had been added. One, just one. The next morning, Claire took Shadow to the vet. She hadn't eaten. She hadn't purred. She hadn't even moved except to sit by the painting. The vet examined her in silence, then looked up, somber. "She's not sick, not physically, but she's grieving. Animals can mourn themselves to death." Claire felt something snap inside her chest. "No," she whispered, hugging Shadow tightly. "You're not allowed to leave too." That night, Claire did something she hadn't done in months. She painted. She brought a new canvas into the studio, sat on the floor beside Shadow, and began to paint the field Elena had loved, the sky, the sun, the flowers. And then, the cat, not just a black silhouette, but Shadow, free, stretched in mid-leap, her face turned toward the sky. Shadow watched. Then gently she curled into Claire's lap. She purred again. But it was different, like a goodbye. That night, Claire dreamed. She stood in a field of golden sunflowers. Elena was there, smiling, whole, peaceful. Beside her was Shadow. She looked back at Claire with soft, loving eyes. Elena reached out her hand. "She's ready," she said. "But she wanted to make sure you'd be okay." Tears slipped down Claire's cheeks. "I'm not ready to say goodbye." Elena's voice was kind. "You don't have to. She'll always find her way back to you." When Claire woke, Shadow was gone from her lap. Gone from the room. Gone from the house. She searched every room, every corner. Only one thing remained, paw prints, leading from the bed to the painting. And on the canvas, a second cat had appeared, leaping beside the first. Weeks passed. The house had grown quieter, less haunted but not empty. The kind of quiet that doesn't ache as much. The kind that holds a memory gently, rather than ripping it open. Claire still left the studio door cracked open. She still placed a small bowl near the windowsill. And each night, she whispered the same words before sleep. "If you're out there, I still see you." One rainy morning, Claire opened Elena's old chest. Inside, sketches, journals, and a stack of canvases never used. At the bottom, something she hadn't noticed before. An envelope. Yellowed with time, her name on it. "Claire, for when you're ready." Hands trembling, she opened it. "If you're reading this, I'm probably gone, or close to it. And I know you're hurting. I'm sorry I didn't get to say goodbye properly. But I need you to do something for me. Keep painting, not like me, like you. Loud, messy, fearless. Let the world see what you carry inside. I know Shadow will keep you company until the end of her path. She's not just a pet. She's a keeper of hearts. She's held mine, and now she'll hold yours. When you're ready, open the studio to others. Let them paint. Let them feel. Let them remember that grief is not a dead end, it's a door. And if you ever wonder if I'm with you, just listen. I'll always be in the brushstrokes." Claire pressed the letter to her chest. Tears streamed freely, but there was no scream, no collapse, just peace. That very week, Claire turned the old studio into a community space. The sunflower room, she called it. Paintings of Elena's lined the walls. Soft jazz played from the old record player, scratchy but warm. A small plaque by the door read, "In memory of Elena Rivers and Shadow, two hearts that taught the world how to listen without words." Artists came, lonely ones, hurting ones, those who had lost someone, those who hadn't touched a brush in years. They painted, cried, and found pieces of themselves they thought were gone. And every so often a visitor would pause mid-stroke and say, "Did you hear that? Like a whisper?" Claire would smile. "That's how you know you're doing it right." One night, alone in the studio, Claire sat beside the final painting, the one Elena had left behind. The woman in the field, the twin cats leaping toward her. She added one last touch. A third figure, a woman with red paint on her hands. Running through the sunflowers, laughing, free. Claire leaned back and whispered, "We're still here, all of us." And then, from outside the window, a soft rustle, the faint jingle of a collar. She turned. Nothing there, but the scent of jasmine filled the air. Epilogue, the sunflower legacy. Years passed. The sunflower room had become a sanctuary, a place where the weight of grief was allowed to breathe, where silence wasn't forced but gently embraced. The door was always open, the air forever filled with the hum of soft jazz and the faint echo of past paintings still hanging on the walls. But it wasn't just a place for art. It was a place for hearts to heal. Claire had long since filled the studio with her own creations, each one more bold and fearless than the last. Her style had changed, matured, and flourished. Loud colors, wild strokes, raw emotion. She'd stopped hiding the pain, stopped pretending it wasn't there. Instead, she made it part of the art, made it something beautiful. And Shadow? Shadow had not been forgotten. Every corner of the room held a trace of her, on the canvas, in the way the light danced through the windows, in the old collar still hanging by the door. Claire had taken to painting one particular piece over and over, a black cat leaping through sunflowers, as if forever running free. But there was a new presence now. A child, no more than 6, stood by the window one morning, eyes wide, full of wonder. "Why do you always paint cats, Miss Claire?" Claire smiled and lowered her brush. She hadn't expected a question like that. "Because cats, like people, leave pieces of themselves behind. And we have to find those pieces, even after they're gone." The child blinked. "Is the cat still here?" Claire's heart tightened, but she didn't speak the words that came to her. Instead, she leaned down as if sharing a secret. "Maybe, but she's more than just a cat. She's a reminder that love never really leaves." That evening, as Claire sat in the studio, an old record spun slowly in the background. The house felt full, warm, alive. Shadow's collar, once lost in the dust, was now resting on the ledge, the bell softly chiming in the breeze, and as the golden light from the setting sun swept through the room, the soft sound of purring reached her ears. It wasn't loud, it wasn't demanding, but it was unmistakable. Claire turned, her heart swelling, her eyes watering. She didn't need to check the room for Shadow, she knew. Some things never truly leave. And in that moment, it didn't matter whether it was the cat, the painting, or the memory that whispered across the room. What mattered was that Claire had finally learned to listen, to love without fear of loss, and to trust that even in silence, there were whispers of the past that would always guide her forward. And so, the legacy of Elena and Shadow lived on, not just in the paintbrushes and the canvases, but in every life that came through the doors of the sunflower room, a place where grief turned into creation, and where love, no matter how lost, was always found again. The end.